You do it or I do it? You do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say yes,
Yes. Let's go.
and I say okay. So we're good.
Yeah, we're recording now. Please go ahead.
Or was a centralized site that was interdependent. Okay. Megiddo was a centralized site which had an interdependent relationship with satellite communities. It was not a community that existed by itself with no major contributions to the outside world. It's very important to understand that. This actual size of Megiddo in the period we're talking about, which is the late fourth millennium, what we call the late early Bronze One, had a very small area with a rather limited population. It housed some very important public buildings, several apparently temples, and possibly residence of elites or important people, maybe even just a single ruler who was living there. It displayed a level of wealth and sophistication which is unmatched anywhere else in the Levant in that period. It boasted a massive stone constructed fortification wall guarding a series of temples and a stone pavement with what we call a palimpsest of incised graffiti. A palimpsest is when people just keep marking things one on top of another. So you get a whole series of things that represent different periods or different activities after a certain amount of time. And the graffiti, what we know of them, there are several figures with people in them and possibly holding weapons and other things. Aside from that, we know that some of them are similar to things you find in Egypt at the same time, so there may be some slight Egyptian influence. The temples are very interesting of themselves. There were three successive temples representing three different, slightly different phases in the late EB1. The earliest temple that we know of is very briefly known, only from a few uh, nicely worked stones, which were probably in its floor. Maybe uh, they were meant to hold up pillars or something like that. They were probably pillar bases. We don't know much about it because there's another temple on top of it, which from the earlier excavations was known as the Stratum 19 temple, and later excavations it's called Stratum J3. And that is a very interesting building. It has a massive rear wall, and it's got two rooms in it, one side by side with the other, and probably what we call a temenos wall. A temenos is the idea is it separates people from outside the temple with a courtyard, and so it keeps on what's happening inside as kind of private. The interesting thing about this temple is it has a very large, nice stone pavement in front of it, as I mentioned before, with all these very interesting graffiti. Inside, it's got a nice stepped altar, which was plastered, and also very nice pillar bases, also of nicely worked flat stones. This is something that is rare in early Bronze One architecture, at least in the Levant, because mostly people used plain field stones and they didn't dress them or take any care in them. This is very unusual, and in a moment we'll see, or I'll explain more about the kind of things we have at Megiddo, which are rather unusual. Aside from that, there is a very nice organization in the way these buildings are set out so that they front most of the plain of Jezreel, or the Jezreel Valley, as we call it. And it looks towards, in this particular case, towards another major site. which is far away, where I can't remember the name at the moment. Okay. Aside from that, there is, when this temple went out of use, another temple was built in a very different way, and it's much larger. It's called the J4 Temple, and it is probably the most impressive building of its era in the Levant. Its walls are over 3 meters thick. They're made out of massive boulders, and the actual building is about 53 meters in length. It also has a large storage space behind it, and it is, as generally the buildings in this period, it is what we call a broad room, which means that it's a rectangular room with an entrance more or less in the center of one of the long walls. Okay, it does not. Now I remember the name of the other site. It's on Mount Tabor. Is kind of a conical-looking mountain when you look from the J3 temples. This J4 temple, though, is uh, uh, has a very different orientation, and it faces more or less north. What is interesting about it is that the inside is beautifully organized with these massive basalt stone, beautifully worked features. It's hard to say exactly what they were. They were placed at very special intervals, and they're sunken in the floor. They're very large. They're over a meter in length, and they're quite wide, and they're extremely well worked in the sense that if you're familiar with basalt, it's a very hard stone, and it has to be chipped and ground. And these features are there. They're called tables by the people who excavated them, but it's hard to say exactly what they were used for. It probably has some association with well, whatever was going on exactly in these temples. Aside from that, there are two very large, very thick basalt um, circular discs. They're about 90 centimeters in diameter. One of them has uh, been excavated completely, and it's got kind of a cup-like thing off center, also nicely worked into it. The other is still stuck in a balk, so we don't know whether there's anything more about it. The excavation has not completely uncovered the temples, so it remains to be seen what might happen in some future time. Hopefully, they won't get to it for many years, and we'll just have to deal with what is available now. But it's an extremely impressive building. Inside, it was plastered in white plaster, the internal walls, and it also has a stepped altar, which was plastered white. In addition, behind it, there is evidence of another massive wall, possibly another temple, or who knows what, might be a house of an elite. The problem with what we know about this relatively limited site is it's got several massive structures, but the rest of the site cannot be excavated because it has later temples from the early Bronze III period, and nobody wants to move them out. There are three temples from that period. What's interesting is that at the end of early Bronze I, the site was abandoned for maybe several generations. There's evidence of people just sort of squatting in the remains of the building, but the site was abandoned for a fairly long amount of time. The people who left it, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. I just switched off my camera,
Oh,
so
okay. Oh, okay, no problem.
yeah, it's not going
Sorry.
to be interrupted.
Uh, the people who were living there were in charge of some kind of a central organization which was able to maintain a lifestyle which is unheard of anywhere else in the Levant in this period. There is also nearby, there is a massive, very large multi-room rock cut tomb cut into the chalk stone of the same hill on which Megiddo is. It's actually the rear, Megiddo is set into the rear of the Carmel range. And what was fascinating about it is there are no other rock cut tombs of this type anywhere else. It also belongs to the same period. And there are a couple smaller buildings there of unusual shape, one with a stairway leading up to it, in a second period. And it may have been somehow related to mortuary behavior. What is important to understand is that the people living there had control over a large amount of wealth. They had, I think it was a site where people came on pilgrimage, and that would explain the possibilities they had to send out people to bring these massive basalt, whatever they are, tables or whatever, and discs from someplace else, and somebody had to work them. It's a lot of work involved in that. And again, it's almost unheard of to have dressed stones in this period. So these people, whoever they were or person in charge, had possibility to expend whatever they had in getting these temples built. And it seems to have lasted for quite a while. Something happened at the end of the period, which is hard to understand exactly why. But if we note that Megiddo at this time had a massive fortification wall, it was excavated in the 1930s by the University of Chicago, it stood well over 2 meters high. I mean, and it's all made out of stone. So a lot of energy and work was expended in its construction. Something happened at the end of the period. We think that whether it was the stoppage of pilgrimages or whether Megiddo also had commercial relations, possibly it was a major redistribution for foodstuffs. We have some evidence of them using cylinder seals for occasionally putting these ceilings on specialized kinds of large scale pots called pithoi, and they may have been using them in trade because we find some of these cylinder seal impressions on pithoi at several sites. I'm in the Jordan Valley and even as far as the coast near the Mediterranean at Tel Megadim. So it's likely that this center was also somehow related to a kind of association which had economic control over certain regions and possibly dealing or redistributing wealth in the shape of foodstuffs, maybe grain or even pulses, lentils, or chickpeas or something of that sort. What happened was apparently the times when it was in full swing were very peaceful. And something happened at the end of the early Bronze I period because most of the smaller sites were abandoned and Megiddo itself was abandoned, possibly as a result of wars that were going on. But we know that in early Bronze II, which is the period just following early Bronze I, Megiddo remained abandoned for a length of time, while other sites rose up. In Kiryat Ata was one, and Tel Rehov was another, and Beit Yerach on the Sea of Galilee was another, and that became a real city. It had a massive fortification wall at the very end of the early Bronze I and remained fortified well through its several hundred years in the early Bronze II and III periods. So it would suggest that something happened that disrupted all kinds of pilgrimages and trade between the different sites that led to the downfall of Megiddo, and it remained more or less kind of abandoned until early Bronze 3. And then people apparently had in their heads that this was an important religious site. And we know that there were at least three structures that are recognized as temples in early Bronze 3 with a very large circular, well, it's called an altar associated with them. So Megiddo, again, became, whether it was a site of pilgrimage, we don't know, but it became an important site for religious observance, whatever was organized there. And it remained so more or less up until well into the Iron Age, where we have, there are so-called temples there, Migdol, or temples with kind of towers in front of them, a specific kind that's known at a lot of other places in the Iron Age. So Megiddo was centralized, an important site up until the end of EB1, and then it just sort of fizzled out. Exactly why, we don't know, but it gives us an idea that this was an important period when the beginnings of urbanized settlement began. And in certain places it continued, and in others it just stopped. Interesting example. There are two other examples that I think are similar. One is Beit Shan in this era. It's more or less the same period, and Beit Shan had the high tel, which is known in Beit Shan. It's called Tel El Husn, not to be confused with another one, which I'll talk about in a moment. And up, it's on the Harod River, or the Jalud, it's also called. And there's another site, which is a tel nearby, which is called Tel Itztaba. And that also seems to have been occupied in the same period. On the interesting thing about Tel Beit Shan is that there is a large public building with which suggests that something more important than just plain houses were there. We don't know exactly what they were doing there, although it was a center for the production of certain kinds of things. We also know that the same building yielded, when it was excavated, these very special lamps, high fenestrated things, which are unknown at other sites, about 12 or 13 found in different buildings there. And my suggestion is that Beit Shan was also some kind of a central a center for surrounding villages, and it may have been something similar in the sense of Megiddo, although we don't have as much important information on it. Another site is Pella, which is in Jordan, in the Jordan Valley, and it's a site that sits above a spring with two smaller tells, but each tell in this period has early Bronze 1 activity. And what is extremely important is that although the sites are not very large, they're fortified. So we don't know exactly what kind of activities were carried out there. One site, which is one of the tells, is called also Tel El Husn in Pella, is important because not only is it fortified, but it also had some kind of a very large public building. We don't know whether three sites which were centers, I believe, for surrounding satellite villages. And afterwards, Beit Shan was, which did not have a large population of people actually living there, and also Megiddo, they both were totally abandoned in early Bronze 2. Whether there was some kind of whatever happened people left the site, and there were not enough people interested, at least up until the early Bronze III, to come back and resettle the site. Both those sites were resettled in early Bronze III, Beit Shan and Megiddo. Pella by was somewhat different. It continued on into early Bronze II, but it never became a very large site. And in early Bronze II, you have a more important site not too far away at Tel Saidia in the Jordan Valley. That was a very large site and became more important. So my suggestion is that certain sites uh, were kind of like dead ends for social interaction and social organization in early Bronze One. They were too small to continue on into EB2 when times became probably bellicose. In other words, there were wars between people and uh, it, populations sort of amassed in certain areas and needed fortifications to for protection. And I think that's more or less what happens in that period. And that's why people for many years thought that early Bronze II was the beginning of urbanism, but it's a much more nuanced kind of reality that we know about of social organization in this period. Do you have any questions particular?
Yeah, I have a question. Can we reconstruct the occupation of Megiddo
Sure.
in early Bronze Age? Can we evaluate how many people live there?
Okay. Because the area that we know of that is in early Bronze One, which has been excavated, takes up about probably something like 20% of the tail on the top. Uh, the rest of it is covered by later remains, which nobody wants to get rid of, including the early Bronze III temples, and they cover a large portion of it. So there was not room for a lot of houses. What we do know is that east of the tell, about 600 meters on a plateau, is another village which is known as Megiddo East. It has been excavated by the team from Tel Aviv University, and there are houses there that are absolutely coeval with what's happening on the tell with the temple, and probably the people who some of the workers and some of the people who provided food and the kind of drones, if you like, were living in that kind of place. There are lots of other sites around. I listed a number that would be similar in probably the way they were organized. And I suggest that Megiddo was just central, and these are satellite communities. Once upon a time, they thought that the whole below the slope to the east, there's a large kind of flattened area, which they believed to have been all part of the early Bronze One community. And it turns out when they did excavations there that they didn't find anything, only the Megiddo East, which is 600 meters away. I excavated a site in near what's now Kibbutz Sarid, not too far away, and it was a part of an early Bronze One village. What's interesting is we had a cylinder seal impression, which is on a potsherd, which is almost identical to one from Megiddo. So we know that that's more or less coeval, and possibly it was part of this whole system. Also, similar kinds of pithoi are found there. So it seems that these were Megiddo was a central site, but it didn't have a very large population. It relied on smaller and surrounding areas, and I suggest also pilgrimage, because the wealth that you see there is just astonishing when you look around at any other site. There's another massive site in the Megiddo Pass called Ein Asur or Asawir, which has probably very many more people, but it was just a mega village. It was an enormous village. It also has a kind of temple, but when you look at it and compare it to the Megiddo temple, it looks like a shack. It's large. and it has a massive stone basin in its courtyard. But aside from that, it doesn't seem to have been plastered. There are no fancy basalt, whatever you call them, tables or discs in it. It's just another very large building amongst hundreds of houses. It was a very large site, but it never had. It was very different in its social organization. I think it was no more than just a village. So the Megiddo was important as a center. It probably rose to importance later as a center in early Bronze III because people felt that there was something sacred about it, and they came and built new temples. And again, it stayed for hundreds and hundreds of years as a sacred center, at least a place where people came. And also later on, it became a Middle Bronze important town, fortified and so on.
Okay. Can do we know anything about
Anything else?
yeah, because we have 8.5 minutes, and do we have information about religious cults at Megiddo, and what type of religion was practiced in early Bronze Age? What type of paganism, to be more specific?
No. The only thing we know of, there there were very few iconographic elements from early Bronze One. One of the important things we see are the picture pavement in Megiddo. There are characters holding knives and doing all kinds of things, but it's hard to say what. Another unusual find was this very large, what we think was a ceremonial sword made out of copper, found in the J3, the level 19 temple, way back when. But it's obviously something. It's not pointed, and it has tangs on it, and it's a very beautiful piece. But that's about it that came out of that area. We don't have more information about what kind of cult is. Unfortunately, we don't even know what language these people spoke. Possibly they were Semites. People call them Canaanites or use the term Canaan, but in the third millennium and in the fourth millennium, that's not really a good idea because we really don't know. We just know that people lived there, and they obviously, these are temples. I mean, there's no question they're not regular houses, and the basalt pieces that you find in them are so extraordinary. What exactly they were doing there, I don't know, but they're also nicely placed and organized, and this whole temple gives a feeling, well, it's magnificent. If you imagine it to be fully constructed, it was something that people must have been in awe of. It's really there's nothing like it at all anywhere in the Levant in this period. So I wish I could say more about who these people were. We can't get into their heads.
Yeah, probably we don't have enough primary sources to evaluate their background.
Well, we even have very few figurines from this period, and there were other temples, but nothing of real import. I mean, you have a small temple in Megiddo, you have a smaller temple in Babedra, if you're familiar with it,
Yeah.
and but if you look at the material from Babedra, I mean, there's very little that we can say is related to their religion. The Chalcolithic period, by contrast, is much different. There's a lot more iconography, figurines, and all kinds of other things that are found. But no, the early Bronze One people, they probably kept it all in their heads.
Do you want to add
Any
something
other
else
questions?
regarding Megiddo?
Well, I think that it's different from Beit Yerach. I know that people have compared it. Beit Yerach at the same period became a true city. I mean, it probably had a temple and lots of other things, but they haven't been fully excavated because there's a lot from later periods there. But I think that there's a major difference. I think Megiddo and Beit Shan and Pella are these kind of dead end social experiments where you had centralized people running economic systems that which they benefited and maybe benefited satellite communities. But when times were peaceful, it worked. And when times got warlike and bellicose, then they just died and they went no place else.
Thank you
That's
so
about
much
it.
for this presentation. We're going to continue talking about
Okay.
different sites in southern Levant. Also, maybe we can tackle some of satellite settlements next time. If you want to add
Okay, I
anything.
could talk a little bit about that. I would also like to talk about Roris Safi, the Enak. Have you?
Yeah,
It's
I
kind
know
of
Horsafi
well,
very well. I know
maybe
Horsafi.
the problem is that it's the most, according to somebody who published a paper in 2012, it's the most looted site. It's the most incredible cemetery. The
Yes,
cemeteries there.
yes. We
Uh,
have over there, archaeologists found tens of thousands of different burial sites. It's like a big
yeah,
necropolis. Unfortunately, Horsafi
it's
is affected.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's affected by looting, but we can talk about Horsafi
Yeah.
next time, maybe in a few days.
Okay. You check with me because I'm in and out these days. Okay.
Yeah, well,
Tomorrow is Grandchildren Day.
of course we have to
So,
respect
okay.
Grandchildren Day, and tomorrow I'm going with my crew to the Dead Sea to drink and party. But we can talk next week. We'll we'll, co-
Okay.
we'll
Good.
coordinate.
Enjoy. Enjoy. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Masalam.
Masalam.
Okay. You
Almak.
too. Bye.
All the best. Take care.